welcome to Literary Prospects, where we talk to authors and literary professionals about books, publishing, and the writing life. I'm Kelley Vick. I'm the host of the program, and in just a moment, it will be my pleasure to introduce today's guest. But first, a reminder that if you like what you hear, please do take a moment to subscribe. It helps us out, and you can make sure you never miss an episode. Also, we've opened a Literary Prospects shop, so if you're looking for bookish shirts, totes, and gifts, please check that out at literaryprospects.etsy.com. And to grab books featured on the podcast and check out more curated book lists, you can visit the Literary Prospects bookstore on bookshop.org. We'll leave all those links below in the show notes. And now, let's introduce today's guest. Gila Pfeffer is a Jewish-American writer and humorist. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, The New Yorker, McSweeney's, Today.com, and more. Her debut memoir, Nearly Departed, Adventures in Loss, Cancer, and Other Inconveniences, is out now. Gila's monthly Feel It on the First campaign reminds women to prioritize their breast health. She splits her time between New York City and London. Gila Pfeffer, thank you so much for joining us today, and congratulations on your beautiful new memoir, Nearly Departed. Publishers Weekly says Pfeffer seamlessly blends tears and laughter in her vibrant debut memoir. The results are as funny as they are heartfelt and inspiring. Author Catherine Newman says Nearly Departed is a book about loss, grief, and mortality that nonetheless sparkles with joy. Author Lee Stein says it turns deeply moving and absurdly funny. This is the unbelievably true story of a woman who made her own luck and saved her own life. One of the most hilarious memoirs I've ever read about surviving the worst. And one more, author and comedian Sarah Cooper says, Nearly Departed is a tribute to all of us who are trying to live this messy thing called life, and all the surprising beauty you can find within. So with that, what can you tell us about Nearly Departed?
It's going to be hard to beat those descriptions, isn't it? What can I tell you? Well, I like that the response from the blurbers and from early readers, beta readers, people who've gotten early copies of the book, the responses have had this in common, and they've all found it to be heartbreakingly hilarious. And that makes me so happy because that's what I set out to do. Um, the book is called Nearly Departed, Adventures in Loss, Cancer, and Other Inconveniences. And let me tell you how long it took to come up with that subtitle, a really long time, because what I'm trying to convey is exactly that. It's loss, wah, wah, cancer, also not fun, and other inconveniences lets the reader hopefully know that we're going to treat these topics with some humor. And it's the story of really outsmarting my genetic destiny. Both of my parents died really young of cancer. My mom at 42 of breast cancer, my dad at 55 of colon cancer. My mom's mom died in her 40s of breast cancer. And so it's the story of how I became very vigilant about my own breast health and used every tool and technology and medical advancement available to me. And not to give away too much, but despite my most drastic and best efforts to avoid it, I got cancer anyway. And then the story is sort of how I, kept on going with treating it, fighting it, and how I took back my power. And so when I say outsmarting my genetic destiny, it's because I clearly have cancer genetically in my family. I tested for the BRCA1 gene. I am positive, and it's my way of trying to take what I know is there and circumvent it.
Why did you decide to write this book now?
I like the addition of the word now at the end of that question because, yeah, why now? Why when I'm 50? Why not when it happened when I was 34? It's because I had to. It was really eating a hole inside of me. And I'm sure that lots of certainly nonfiction writers will say this, memoirists will say, I just had to get the story out. And I really did. I had told it a bunch of times to friends, you know, on several continents. I split my time between New York and London. So I told the story verbally, but I've always liked words. I've always been an avid reader since I was a little kid. And there was just something in me that said, this story has so many twists and turns and moving parts. This story of my life. There's one story, that's part of my life that I felt like I had to do it. So everybody walks around saying, I'm going to write a book about this thing that happened to me. And then they either forget about it or they find out what's entailed in writing and publishing and marketing a book and they say, pass, no thanks. Or they're like me, where they blab about it for about 10 years until everyone in their family wants to throttle them and they say, just go do it already, will you? And so that's why I think enough time had passed from, since the moment where I had a preventative double mastectomy in an effort to avoid getting cancer. And in that surgery, found early but aggressive cancer. That was a real kick in the head, given what I was trying to avoid and how far I went to avoid it. But in that moment of finding out that it was cancer, and in that moment of sitting in an oncologist office where she told me I was going to have the same chemo that my mom had in the 90s, that something clicked in my head and something just went, you're going to write about this, um, knowing absolutely nothing about writing books whatsoever. And
Mhm.
then what really set this endeavor in motion was, and this is where community is so important. I befriended about 7 or 8 years ago someone in my neighborhood who happens to be a literary agent at a top New York agency. She's not my agent. She doesn't represent me. We want to stay friends, and so, but it was her validation and her saying, in response to my declaration that I wanted to write a memoir, it was her saying, having seen some of my writing samples, that she felt that I had the chops. She said, I think you can do this. I think that um, you know, do have, whether it's, talent or a way with words, but, did I need that validation from a professional? Yeah, I did. And I want everyone listening to this to know that I did. And I hope that when someone tells you that you can do something, you listen to them too, because sometimes telling yourself isn't enough. And she gave me a lot of guidance. She said, memoir is really hard. She was right. She said, grow your platform. I said, what does that mean? She encouraged me to start a blog, which has since sort of shut down and became a Substack. But that got me comfortable with putting my writing out there in public. It's not like sending a little newsletter out to your nearest and dearest. It's putting it on the internet where it lives forever. She told me to start a public Instagram account, which I did, and that's the one that you see today. And it was all of these pre-steps before you even start writing a book. Think about, who is this book for, and how are you going to get this book into those people's hands? So why am I writing it now? Because her advice and guidance set me on the right path, but it took me a few years, really. I'd say about 4 or 5 years until I figured out what I wanted to say to an audience, how I wanted to interact with them. They've grown into this wonderful community where, we connect on various levels and topics, but it wasn't until I had that in my pocket that I could start exploring looking for an agent, and that agent would have something to go to a publisher with. So why now is because a few years ago I realized that I had to do all these things before now. And that's where we got to today.
The book is devastating in so many ways, and it's also hilarious, as we heard in the blurbs. Um, how'd you do that?
That is my entire personality, actually. I think that was actually the easiest part for me. And that is in zero way a brag. I think
Mhm.
writing is so difficult. I heard one of your episodes where you're speaking to another fiction author about writing and how it should be fun, and how writers talk about how hard writing is. And she said it gets a bad rap. It's, people say it's so hard. And I was sitting there going, well, I disagree with you. I think writing is actually really, really hard. And, mentally, physically, the hunched over, the sitting in the chair. I've got a slip disc, which I'm sure I developed from um, just sitting and working, into late into the night. But that part is hard. And the structuring for me, because, it was my first time, it was hard. Thank God I have an editor who I think is perfect for this project. That's important, that really saved the book. But in terms of the part that I think I do well, like the talent I bring to the table, if we were having a party and everybody had to bring something, I'd bring my dark humor. I would bring the ability to make a joke out of literally anything, while also understanding the importance of um, balance, and not overstepping, not going too far.
Mhm.
Um, I like to make things bearable for people, so that the message can be delivered.
Yeah.
Because if you're talking about something that's tough and that's dark, I didn't want to write a heavy memoir. I could have made this incredibly heavy.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
just, it's not my personality. It's not my brand. The way I cope in my real life is to make jokes. I had to
Mhm.
go through the chemo anyway. Why shouldn't I entertain myself and make jokes about it? We had to go to our mother's funeral anyway. Why shouldn't we point out that on the way into the cemetery there was a little inn that said fine food and spirits? And my siblings and I thought that that was downright hilarious.
Mhm.
You can't, we couldn't bring her back, and I couldn't not have the cancer. I think that laughter is so important for myself, and
Mhm.
therefore I thought for a reader, laughter would be really important, so that they could have somewhere to put all those feelings that I hopefully conjured up in telling the story.
Yeah. Do you think you've always used humor
Oh yeah.
as that sort of coping to cope with life?
Yeah. Yep. That's me. Sometimes to the point where, again, I never belittle anything.
Mhm.
And I tend to take a cue from the person I'm speaking to see how, how are they coping with their difficult situation. If I see that somebody is a much more serious person and I'm coming to offer some comfort or support in a crisis, I'm not going to force my way of coping onto them. But if I see that they might appreciate a joke, even a really dark one, even for that 2 seconds of relief, the laughter offers some relief. It's like opening, it's a pressure valve to just let out some of that steam. You can go right back to feeling the heavy feelings, but there's something, like, I can only compare it to, I have 4 kids, and I gave birth 4 times, and I went through labor 4 times. And so you're living for those moments in between contractions, because you need that relief. You could not possibly carry on in that state of anguish and
Yeah.
pain. And in life, you just need those breaks, no matter what you're going through. Sometimes you have to find them yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned you lost your mother and your grandmother to breast
Yeah.
cancer. And then you were tested and found out that you carried the BRCA1 gene. What was that like when you found out?
It was validating, because my mom my mom died in 1994. I was 20 years old. Everyone pause to do some math and figure out that I am 50. My grandmother, her mom, died when I was 3 months old,
Mm.
1974. And there was no genetic testing that I knew of then. There was no internet then. I had no way of, other than, what I was learning in biology in school about genes and hereditary conditions and exposures to risk. I've always been very interested in information about whatever the topic is. I like to know things. And this, I sensed from the time my mom died that this was something I would have to collect as much information on as possible. So at 20, I got myself a breast specialist, a doctor. And instead of only going to my gynecologist or my GP, I wanted to see a specialist who could advise me and guide me and keep me updated on the latest available screenings, diagnostics. It wasn't
How smart of
until
you not to just how smart of you to do that at 20. I mean,
I know, is it smart or is it like my deep survival instinct? You know, I saw my mom went, her mom went. All four of my grandparents were Holocaust survivors. So I don't even know, the Nazis wiped out so much of my family that I don't even know what their genetic makeups are,
Mhm.
but I can have a guess at it. And um, I guess I don't know, good at sensing patterns, or I saw it coming. I said, this thing's
Mhm.
coming for me. What can I do to stop it? And by the time I was 30, that's when my dad passed away. So when I was 30, I became the oldest living member of my entire family. My grandparents were gone, my parents were gone. I have four younger siblings, and I was like, right, this is not working, people. We had like an all hands, like, how are we going to stop this early death business?
Mhm.
Um, and I just kept my antenna up and paid attention. So I had my first mammogram at 30 when the normal age is 40. And I
Mhm.
was like, right, we're gonna look for it, we're gonna look for it, we're gonna look for it until in my, I think 32, 33, somebody mentioned gene testing. And this is not the gene testing we know today, where 23andMe, you send a little spit sample, you find out all the things you find out about yourself. This was a blood test. It was expensive. It was done at my doctor's office. I did it privately because I was afraid that maybe it would perhaps impact it could be considered a pre-existing condition.
Ah, mhm.
And yeah, I mean, they can't do that anymore. Like, laws were passed. Along with gene testing came a bunch of other issues, one of them being, can someone be considered to have a pre-existing condition if they are a gene carrier for something? So that was just one of many things. In 2005, that's when I went in for the test. I was pregnant with my third child, and my OBGYN was uh, terrified to give me the result. She's like, if it comes back positive, do you know what you're going to do? And around that time, I'd also heard about preventative double mastectomies, which
Mhm.
today everyone knows because of Angelina Jolie, but back then it wasn't a thing. People weren't doing it. It was considered pretty extreme and pretty drastic. And a friend of mine had done it. Her mom had had breast cancer. And the minute I heard about it, I said, I'm doing that. Gene or no gene, I'm doing that. So when my doctor, with great trepidation, delivered the results to me, I was about, I don't know, 8 months pregnant with my third.
Mhm.
She was worried to tell me. I said, this is great. Now I have even, more confirmation on my decision to do what I'm going to do anyway.
Mhm.
So that's how that felt. And I know I don't say that lightly, because I know that there are a lot of people who are either afraid to get gene tested, afraid to look at their family histories and examine all that. And I spend a decent amount of time on Instagram talking about prevention. I run a Feel It On the First campaign where I encourage women to do a breast self-exam, find out your risk profile, schedule a mammogram if it's time. It's much more frightening to not know what's coming your way. You speak to thriller authors.
Mhm.
What's a thriller? Oh my God, what's coming around the corner? We don't know. I
Mhm.
don't need thrillers. When
Mhm.
people don't need thrillers when it comes to their health, right? They
Right.
need
Mhm.
boring textbooks. Here's how this goes, and here's how that goes. So the very long answer to your very short question is that I felt validated, vindicated, and empowered when I found out that I had the BRCA1 gene.
And then you decided to go forward with the double mastectomy,
Yeah.
and you get a call shortly thereafter from your surgeon. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. And interestingly, that's where I was in early versions of the book before I knew how to write a book. That was where I started my book. I started it from waking up from surgery. I thought that was my, inciting incident. I'm making air quotes for those of you listening, only on audio. Um, it was. It was a huge decision. It was a necessary decision, but it was a really pivotal moment in my life because I woke up from surgery. I was 34 years old and I felt for the first time in over a decade light and free and safe. I felt like, great, the cancer cloud has evaporated or moved on to bother somebody else. It won't be my problem anymore.
Mhm.
And I enjoyed that feeling for about 6 days. And I was recovering at home with drains coming out of me all over the place. It was Thanksgiving Eve, and the family was gathered downstairs. My mother-in-law was preparing a beautiful meal, and I was going to sort of pick my way down the stairs for the first time since getting home from the hospital. And my surgeon called, presumably to say, "How are you doing?" But no, she was calling to say, "We found two early but aggressive cancers in your right breast tissue in pathology. You saved your own life by doing the surgery." Dun dun dun.
Wow. And then you go through chemo still afterwards. And you made a decision not only with the mastectomy, but also with the chemo, not to tell your kids.
Yeah.
Mm, Why did you make that decision? And how did you manage to not let them know?
I'm actually writing a personal essay about that right now for a publication. And it's, yeah, to me, that was probably one of the hardest things to manage, in addition to the trauma of having to undergo what I set out to avoid.
Yeah.
I decided they didn't know about the mastectomy. They just knew that I was having a surgery. And the way well, my kids at the time were 1, 3, 5, and 7. They were really, really little.
Mhm.
And even in going into the preventative surgery, I didn't really know how to explain to them. It's such an adult thing
Yeah.
to have to explain. How do you explain to kids so little about, you know, uh, breasts and how they're dangerous? I mean, this is what sustained them for the first months of their lives.
Yeah.
It was all too, so I said, because I was using my stomach, fat, and muscle for the reconstruction, the procedure is called a tram flap. I told them, mommy's going to have an operation on her stomach to keep her healthy. And there were no further questions. Like their grandparents and my friends would come over and bring them presents and have them come for sleepovers. And kids have a way of, I guess, not looking a gift horse in the mouth. So things were going pretty well for them. I explained that I'd be away for a few days, that I'd be recovering in a chair, that they could come and visit me. The practicalities of it. Um, but they could see that I was there, and they can see that I was fine,
Mhm.
and they didn't have any questions. And I just thought, when I got that diagnosis back about the cancer, I did have to have a talk with myself and say, all right, what's the narrative here? How do we spin this to these
Mhm.
kids who, as a person who had been traumatized by cancer from my own mom and dad, and I was an adult then, I didn't want to traumatize them if I didn't have to. And I want to be very careful to say that every parent can decide how to interact with their kids on this in their own way, and what suits their kids best. But I knew that for me, my chemo was going to be preventative. It was not trying to shrink a tumor, thank God. They
Mhm.
had already removed the breast tissue. I had a subsequent node dissection on the right side, and they found micrometastases. They found like cellular cancer in, was it one or two lymph nodes? And it was all happening. They were catching it as it was happening. So there was no, well, we're going to do some chemo and have a scan and see how she is. There was no conversation that I thought needed to be had around. Lots of children's books deal with this, like how to talk to your kids about, your illness as a parent. And it's as much to prepare kids for what the physical manifestations of the treatment and the disease are.
Mhm.
Mommy's going to look different. Mommy's not going to be able to take you to school or read you stories at night, as it is to prepare them for potentially, if it's a life-threatening illness, there could be some pretty heavy conversations to have. Thank God, I'm so fortunate that I didn't have to have those conversations.
Mhm.
And the way I decided was that it would be easier for me, actually. It would have been easier for me to not have to explain these things, not have to shoulder their reactions to some very terrifying conversations, to not carry their psychological burdens. I had my own to carry. And I thought, you know what? I'll carry my own and theirs. And I will take it upon myself to be on alert 24/7 and hide the side effects of my chemo. Chemo's breast cancer chemo in particular. Some chemos you don't lose your hair, but breast cancer you do. My doctor said you will 100% lose your hair. Um, and I did. And at the first sight of it falling out, I had it shaved at my hairdresser's. And that's a whole scene in the book too. But trying to be their mom, and in the moments, most of which I felt well, I did all the mom things I was doing. I was giving them baths and dinner time and bedtime and snuggling with them, taking them to school. And when I couldn't, friends and family stepped in for me. But the decision to not tell them then, I knew I
Mhm.
would one day, but then, was as much for them as it was for me. And I'm so glad that I did it. And I'm so grateful that they were little enough that I had the opportunity to do that, because any older, it would have been much harder.
Yeah. You were sleeping in a hat.
Slept in a hat,
Right?
showered in a shower cap. Kids have a way of bursting in on you, Mom.
Mhm.
Um, I was sleeping in a like a velour beanie. How these
Mhm.
children walked in the morning into my room, as they did every morning, and didn't say, "Hey, Mom, what's with the hat?" I really thank God for that. I will never know. And I had an answer prepared. If they would have asked me, I would have said, "Mommy's taking some very strong medicine to make sure she stays healthy, and it's making her head cold." Maybe I should write a thriller. Like, I'm pretty good at plotting out, anticipating disasters and like working around them. I
Mhm.
threw myself wholly into hiding it from them, and I decided that no one, including my husband, would see my bald head. I thought, I just want to minimize witnesses to this horror that for me was doubly horrifying, because I tried to avoid it. And it was
Mhm.
really it was infuriating to have to be dealing with something to it felt very invasive, and not in the way that people might think breast cancer is invasive. I thought, like, how dare you? And so if
Mhm.
I could minimize the amount of people who saw these side effects, I think I thought that would help me, and it did. It was a full-time job. At night, I was stuffing my really excellent wig, sponsored by my brother-in-law. I was going to go out and get a cheap polyester wig, and he said, he's a lawyer, and he's like, "No, I'll barter with a client of mine who's a wig maker. Just go get whatever you want." And I had two fabulous wigs, which I wore a hat on top of to make it look more natural. And every night I had a ritual about, hiding things. I had a checklist. Is it stuffed in the back of the closet? Is your head fully covered? Can you pull a hoodie on with a hood on over your hat? I don't know how I got away with it, but I did.
You did.
Mm,
You were um, the oldest living member of your family at 30, right? I think you mentioned.
yeah.
How do you think that that affects the decisions you make and the way that you live your life even now?
It's very motivating. It's very motivating for me personally to stay on top of my health,
Mhm.
and other dangers that are not even health related. Some might call that anxiety. Sure, call it whatever you want. But I'm definitely a cautious, plannery person, and I come across as fun and laid back. I'm fun, but I'm not laid back,
Mm.
and I've got backup plans on backup plans. And I think that one of something else that was very, very validating for me was that I have four younger siblings, three of whom are women. And when I was going through this, at a time when most people weren't, two of my sisters were in their 20s and one was in her teens. She had just graduated high school. And at the time when I announced to my family that this is what I intended to do, the high school one was off in her own world, fair enough.
Mhm.
But the ones in their 20s, one was married and the other one, actually, no, they were both married. One had kids already and one didn't.
Mm.
And they said, "We support your decision. That's good for you. That's not something we would ever consider doing, but let us know what we can do to help with your kids, with your recovery, with whatever." And I wasn't there to, force or lecture them, but I just thought, in addition to helping myself, I could lead by example. And I've always taken my role as a big sister pretty seriously.
Mm.
Um, and when that diagnosis came back, my two sisters in their 20s ran to get gene tested, both tested positive for BRCA. They ran to have preventative double mastectomies. One sister who was in New York used the same medical team that I had. And thank God they, their results came back the way I'd wanted my results to come back, which was clean
Mhm.
tissue. And so, in terms of the way I live my life, it definitely makes me more aware of the importance of keeping your eyes open and not burying your head in the sand.
Mhm.
And it makes me more aware of my responsibility to share my story to help other people, whether those people are my family members, my kids, my sisters, extended family, or anyone who comes across me via my work, my essays, my writing, my social media, my Substack, and now this book. That's a major goal for me in this book is that if people do one more thing, if women do one more thing to add breast cancer prevention to their rosters of 8 million things to do, I will consider that a success.
Yeah. Have you always been a writer in some way?
Hmm. I'm going to say yes. And the reason I say that
I
is
was gonna say,
because,
is that true?
well, there's all these formats on well, whatever was Twitter and now Threads. What is a writer? When are you considered a writer? When are you considered an author? Who is an artist? I have always enjoyed, not just enjoyed, I've always expressed myself best with words. So whether those words are coming out of my mouth or being written, passing a note to a friend in class back in the 80s,
Mhm.
I saw the power of making someone feel a certain way with the written word.
Yeah.
Um, you can do a lot. You can do a lot with words, and I hope that I only do good things with them.
Mhm.
But it is, I I have made a lot of friends laugh in very difficult times with the most ridiculous text. I have a close friend who lives in another country, and she's been dealing with something awful for a long time, for about 20 years. And once in a while, I'll just check in and say hi, and she'll say something back, about how things are going. And I'll just write something truly horrendous and awful and rude that if you read it, you'd think, how could you possibly get away with saying that? And I know that she's on the other end of that fiber app to cable connection, however the internet works, laughing her head off,
Mhm.
and she'll send me back a bunch of laughing emojis. And when we speak later, she'll say, "That absolutely killed me." Um, I remember my favorite subject in school, even second, third grade, was creative writing. I loved that time. There were people who dreaded when the teacher said, "Right, now for the next 20 minutes, we're going to write a piece of creative writing." And I was like, yes, because it meant I didn't have to do math, which was the
Yeah.
absolute worst. But uh, I worked in fashion for many years, through and then after college. But that was, aside from being a passion of mine, it was something that paid the bills.
Mhm.
A part of me always dreamed about writing books or articles or working in journalism. I just didn't, nobody ever explained to me that that was a viable career. I didn't see a way to do that. Um, and it wasn't until I set the fashion thing aside to focus on my family, that I just started to feel like I need to do something. I have things to say. I have some creativity burning in me, and I realized that it wasn't going to be fashion that I went back to. It probably coincided with um, the blog era and social media. There's so much to be done for all of its evils. There's so much that you can say and convey and communicate, um, entertain, educate, inspire through these multiple platforms. And I just feel really, really comfortable there. So I think if you're asking me the question, and no one's ever asked me that before, I do think I've always been a writer. Maybe I was a writer who didn't write, but now I'm a writer who does write.
I love that. Maybe I was a writer who didn't write, but now I'm a writer who does. And speaking of the blog, The Mom Who Knew Too Much,
Mm.
um, can you just talk a little bit about getting that started? And I know you said you talked to your friend who's an agent, but really actually doing it.
Yeah, I was starting from scratch. I had no writing out in the world, and I kind of missed the golden age of blogs, which is a shame because I think that that would have been a great format for me.
Mhm.
But I decided to do it anyway. What the hell? Because a blog is public. Nobody was editing me, which is a good and a bad thing. Um, and I needed to practice getting my writing comfortable, sharing my writing with the public. I spent a lot of time thinking about the name of the blog and what it should look like, and like things that maybe I should have spent a little bit less time on and more time, writing. But in the end, it was a good exercise in understanding the importance of having something recognizable, something catchy. And I don't remember how I okay, I thought the easiest way to enter would be in the parenting space, which again, the parent blogging and even parent Instagramming was already reaching a super saturation point. But it was an easy entry point for me because I figured out how to interact with and network with other parent bloggers, mostly mom bloggers, on Instagram.
Mhm.
And for the most part, I found them to be an inviting and welcoming community. So I would start experimenting with memes and tweets and, mostly written stuff and less photo memes. And I kind of saw that as a precursor to what I could do later, but it was my testing ground. Can I gain any traction with these words I'm writing about, funny words I'm writing about, the relatable frustrations of parenting teens. Um, I came up with the mom who knew too much because I wanted it to be in a parenting space and I wanted to convey that it was going to be a little bit, hopefully a little bit more intelligent and I wasn't going for low-hanging fruit on parenting. I had something to say, um, other than just my kids are slobs and they never flush the toilet. I did plenty of that too, but I tried to make it some of the things I wrote about more poignant. And again, because I still had all four kids at home, and even though they were getting older, getting ready to leave home, parent blogging was a good way to start, and it dovetailed nicely with the public Instagram account that I started, which used to be called The Mom Who Knew Too Much, with a dot in between each word.
Mhm.
If you're going to start an Instagram handle, please don't pick such a long one. It's terrible. But and I eventually changed it to at Gila Pfeffer. Um, but getting that blog off the ground was terrifying. I think it was more terrifying than anything I'm doing now. I was starting from scratch. I was thinking, who's going to read this anyway? And then I was thinking, well, what if they do read it and I look foolish? But I kind of just I had no choice. And I'm not a coder. I'm learning about, WordPress and how to embed links and how to add photos. And it was a steep learning curve, but I was able to do that on my own time before I started thinking about a book. So putting it out into the world was important and I'd say challenging. Eventually, I kept it going for a while, and I saw that I wasn't really writing more than once a year. I had these grand visions of like putting out a post per week. And how hard could it be? Really hard, actually, when you care about the quality of your content.
Mhm.
So that just I only recently dwindled it down so that if you go to the momwhoknewtoomuch.com, it'll take you straight, it redirects you to Gila Pfeffer, to my website.
Hmm. And then what was the road to publication like for you for the book?
Well, I went in eyes wide open and very prepared, and that helped a lot. And what do I mean by that? I mean that in the process of creating an online presence, mainly Instagram was my main platform, still is my main platform. I was initially interacting with other parenting content creators, and then I tried to find the writing community, and I started interacting with writers of all kinds, short form, long form, fiction, memoir. I started to see who had put out multiple books, and then I didn't know this existed before. I found there was a world of people who would teach these things. There are people who can teach you personal essay, who can teach you humor writing, who can teach you how to put together a proposal, how to pitch articles and essays. And I felt a bit silly, like running amongst all of these people, 20 and 30-year-olds who had MFAs, but I thought, okay, well, this is my MFA. I'm creating a bespoke MFA for myself. And I did take all these classes. And during COVID, I did sign up for several week-long classes. And I did eventually work one-on-one with teachers, because I thought I, I'm I don't want to make it about, it wasn't about age that I needed to get it done with already, but I just thought I'm so eager to get this project underway that I want to take a shorter cut than being in a class with others, which are amazing and I highly recommend them. But I did some one-on-ones, and then eventually I came across an author named Lee Stein, who is amazing and now a good friend of mine. But she's written fiction, memoir, poetry. She has a very popular Substack called Attention Economy, and I found her through reading her novel. She has a novel called Self Care, and I read it, posted about it, tagged about it, thinking authors don't talk to regular people. I'm just letting my followers know that I like this book. And she wrote back saying, "Thank you so much for um, sharing my book and tagging me." And I was like, "What? What? Well, oh, hello, person." And so a relationship developed where I took some of her group classes and then did some one-on-one, and eventually she's the one who I worked with in a very intense 5-month period to put together a proposal. And I think had I not done that, I would still be sitting here writing this proposal 3 years later, because it's not only that it's hard, it's that I didn't know what I was doing. And I
Mhm.
wanted to make sure that if I was going to go out to agents, that I did it right. So through her, I learned that the publishing industry is it's rapidly changing, and it's tricky, and nobody is really sure what will make a book successful. And most important, I learned from her that authors are expected to do a lot of marketing and publicity, and just putting themselves out there. Like we're expected to not go it alone, but bring a lot to the table. And that was a really important lesson that she taught me. And then I started paying attention to what other people were saying online, people in the industry, and it all seemed to match up, where publishers will do their best for their authors, but it's it's not the 90s anymore. And when I tell people I'm launching a book, they picture Sarah Jessica Parker at a party coming down a winding staircase in a double height room, and I'm like, that's not what's happening, not even a little bit. And they're helping support me in finding in scheduling author events and author talks, but I'm doing a lot of it too. And that's fine, because what's the use of spending years making all of these connections if not that? So my path to publication went kind of how I thought it would go. I think because I'd worked so hard and with such a professional on the proposal, I did think, I don't know why I thought this, but I thought that it would go very quickly and gangbusters, and there'd be a big auction over my book. And there wasn't, but I did find the right agent in an amount of time that I'm happy with. I think it took me a few months,
Mhm.
and she was able to sell the book fairly quickly. But again, I really didn't go in with any delusions, and I think that that helps my mental health a lot. I have a lot of friends who are struggling with various aspects of their publishing journeys, and I empathize with them. I, feel for them. I send them jokes by WhatsApp,
Mhm.
but ultimately, I think it's important to know exactly what you're getting into. But I really don't have any complaints with my path. As a debut memoirist, I am thrilled. I am lucky. I think that my editor is perfect for this project on so many levels. I adore my agent. Um, yeah, so no juicy gossip there.
Well, what's your best advice for aspiring authors?
Huh. I mean, I feel a bit silly giving advice because I'm just a new author myself, but I guess everybody's got
You're there
some.
though. You're
Yeah,
you're a debut memoirist now.
I am a debut memoirist now, and I have wisdom to share with everyone, so pay attention. I, I think the most important piece of advice, and I recently posted something about this to Threads, is about building a community of writers who are supportive, whose input you value, who are available, and who understand what kind of feedback you're looking for and that it has to be given in a timely fashion. I leaned on so many people throughout throughout the writing process. With the proposal, I would send chunks out to beta readers, and I somehow worked up the nerve to ask people who were many pay grades above me, who I'd taken classes with, who I'd interacted professionally with before, and I said, hey, would you mind giving me some feedback on this chapter or on this intro or on this prologue? And they could have said, sorry, no, I don't have time. But they didn't. They said yes. And I got absolutely priceless feedback. And that was my first exposure, really, to understanding the importance of, getting someone else's point of view. And as things started to really heat up with the manuscript and, we were getting to the point where it was due, it was also important that I have someone who's available quickly and on a moment's notice and understands, quick turnaround. If you read my acknowledgement section, there are tons of writers in there, some who really, really showed up for me in ways that I wouldn't have imagined. One of them printed out chapter by chapter and marked it up with a red pen and scanned it back to me. Yeah, like because she's my friend.
Mhm.
Um, Community. Get yourself a community of writers, not friends who are going to tell you that everything you do is amazing, because that's not useful. People who will be very honest, kind, but honest, and say, uh, here's what I think would make this better, or what are you trying to achieve with this, or even, I'm not the best person to give you feedback on this, here's someone else. But have your people on speed dial, so that they can not only cheer you on and support you, but make your work better. I think that is the most important thing. This book did not happen on its own. This book did not happen only at my hand. I know that my name as the author is on the cover, but wow, a lot of eyeballs, a lot of eyeballs were on this thing.
Traditional last question. When Nearly Departed is made into a movie or series, what do you think the theme song should be?
So I should have prepared this because I have listened to so many of your episodes, and you think I'd come in like, you think I would take a dramatic pause and pretend I'm thinking of something devastatingly clever and then just saying something off the top of my head. But I hadn't prepared something, which is so silly of me. But The song that comes to mind is from Monty Python's The Meaning of Life,
Mhm.
and it's the song Always Look on the Bright Side. I love Monty Python. I love satire. I've always loved British satire and humor. And Always Look on the Bright Side of Life is a very satirical song that plays while terrible things are happening. And I think that's just hilarious. So
I think
that's what I'm picking.
that sounds perfect. I can't think of anything that would be better.
I would sing it for you, but I'm nice to everyone and I'm going to spare you.
Gila Pfeffer, thank you so much for coming on. It has really been a pleasure getting the chance to talk to you.
The pleasure was entirely mine. Thank you. I just think it's so cool to be the guest here when I've listened to so many other guests. It's almost like I'm putting myself into, into that slot. But this has been delightful, and I think that you ask phenomenal questions. So thank you for those.
Thanks for joining us on Literary Prospects. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.